Narendra Taneja, India's leading energy expert. Narendra, we're seeing now as the hours evolve the reaction, and in this neighborhood where I am, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, and Qatar, the four main of the GCC states, condemning Israel for its preemptive strike on Iran. Where will India stand on this? Where do you think how this event will be perceived? And obviously, we know the American position is articulated there by Rad, somewhat complicated, somewhat compromised in their ability. But where does India, do you think, going to stand on something like this?
Well, I mean, India has a huge stake in that region. We've got 10 million Indians working there. Our economies are quite integrated. And at the same time, for many of the things that we are trying to do in terms of India, Middle East economic corridor, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we look at Europe via the Middle East. That has been the past, ancient past, and that's kind of, a premise that on which India is building the future. So therefore, a huge stake. But that said, at the same time, our second worry is that, if you really decode what is happening and what might happen, look at the country which is going to be the main beneficiary is going to be China. And that's not a very happy kind of,
In what way? In what sense?
Well, if you, for instance, if the United States get bogged down, I mean, first of all, get involved and then get bogged down in the Middle East. And that means that it will not really have enough diplomatic and military bandwidth to, for instance, see what happened in South China Sea and in Taiwan. If the United States get bogged down first in Ukraine and Europe and now in the Middle East and all that, then, that will be a kind of open invitation to China to move into Taiwan. So that's one. Number two is that, in the entire region, with the United States growing weaker and weaker, literally by week, that means which other country has kind of military, diplomatic, and economic capacity to really try to move into it. Not that the China, the United States, but at the same time, its presence will grow. We have already seen that in Iran, for instance. So therefore, the question is that, what Israel is trying to do, the way we are looking at it from New Delhi. I mean, if you see the last 18 hours, what Israel has been targeting is very simple. They're trying to decapitate A, the nuclear leadership of Iran, and B, the military leadership. Look at the targets. It's very clear. And in the process, they want to engineer a kind of regime change in Iran. Can they really achieve it? Is kind of Israel alone capable of achieving and all that? Is the United States somewhere behind the picture? We don't know that. We don't have any evidence. But at the same time, if you look at, study that, so-called preemptive or whatever you call it, attacks, it's very clear that Israel alone probably can't do it. Because these are very, very, if you look at the quality of attacks, very precise. Even an apartment going exactly to the 6th floor, not to the 7th floor.
And on the back of all that, should we expect that India will join the GCC states in condemning this attack, or will India remain silent?
Well, you see, the question is that, as far as India is concerned, the GCC is very, very close and a strategic friend. And so is Israel, and so is the United States. So we hope that, these countries look at Iran is an ancient civilization, Arab countries are ancient civilizations, and we all know the US. We hope that they don't need any kind of, thing from us. All we want is then them to come to the negotiating table. We want Iran to come to the negotiating table, not only with the United States, but also with the International Atomic Energy Agency. But let's not forget one thing. In the entire region, the only country that has nuclear weapon is Israel. No other country in the region has nuclear weapons. Of course, there are nuclear weapons in Turkey, but those weapons don't belong to Turkey. They belong to NATO. But except for Israel, no other country has nuclear weapons. But if Iran acquires nuclear weapon capability, within no time, you will have Egypt, you will have Turkey, you will have Saudi Arabia, you will have even United Arab Emirates, all actually rushing to acquire nuclear weapon capability. And that will change the geopolitical equilibrium, not only in the Middle East, across North Africa and Central Asia. We don't want to see that. In India, we don't want all these countries acquiring nuclear weapon capability. So that's actually the biggest challenge. At the same time, We want to see economic equilibrium. We want economic stability because that's good for us. And we also think that, it's important post the United States that these countries should be able to manage their own affairs in such a way that they can keep other powers, especially China, out of it.
On that point, the stopping, the intervening, this is now the number one and only item on the G7 agenda in Canada, and the G everybody who's attending agenda, including your own prime minister, I would expect. Is there a point in which the the powers that be, including India, which you sort of indicated in your earlier comment, weren't even willing on this occasion to condemn Israel and haven't been willing to do so in their activities in the last 2 or 3 years, that this Netanyahu government, this rogue nation now it has upturned the international order of human rights, the global commitment to the Security Council. Everything has basically been thrown up in the air. Is there a point in which India joins a conversation that says this rogue nation that is on charges in the International Criminal Court for war crimes and genocide, perhaps, needs to be curtailed? Could that be a conversation item in Canada for the G7? Your thoughts on that and India's position on that idea?
You see, the point is the kind of world we live in today, the kind of order, disorder that we have in the world today. Each country is basically trying to protect its own national interests. So our prime minister travels to Canada not to preach this or that, is going to basically see to protect our national interests. Because the way we look at the world is very different, for instance, the way you look at the world in Washington, D.C. or Paris or Dublin for that matter. You see, so our focus is going to be basically look at G7, the construct of G7. These are mainly the countries which are kind of may say whatever in public, but the fact remains that many of them are on the side of Israel. And they are very close to the United States. And at the same time, as I said, we have to see and really what Israel has targeted the last 18 hours. Is the target basically is Iran's capacity to retaliate? Have they really succeeded in that? I'm talking of, ballistic missiles, talking of the military establishments and also the nuclear establishment and so on and so forth. So these are the questions. The question is that, in the Middle East, particularly, what countries like us, we want is basically that there should be stability. Don't forget that Iran is a member of BRICS and India is a very strong member, one of the founders of BRICS. So we look upon Iran for two ways. One, a civilization friend. Don't forget that both Iran and India are Aryan civilization. Both the countries are Aryan. So we have very close relations with Iran, people to people. At the same time, of course, if Iran wants to acquire nuclear weapon capability, and if it's not acceptable to Iran's neighbors and others' neighbors start shopping nuclear weapons in Pakistan or in North Korea, is that a kind of situation? We don't want that. Now, so that's the thing. But so when it comes to the G7, the focus is going to be, a lot of focus is going to be number one on the Middle East, and number two is going to be economy and energy in particular. You see, so this is, and for us, you can imagine, we are the third largest, energy consumer in the world. We are the fourth largest economy, and we are actually the country is still heavily dependent on imports. We import roughly 89% of total requirement of oil. So if Strait of Hormuz tomorrow, for instance, something happens there, or for instance, Iran decide, all right, if nothing else, let's do something so that, 20% of the global oil trade is adversely affected. The country that's going to be hit the hardest would be India. So we will definitely, if this comes up in G7, India is going to take it up and say, look, let's not create that kind of situation. But the main question is that, today the main point is we still don't know the depth of damage that Iran has suffered. Number two, we still don't know whether Iran, A, wants to retaliate or is in a position to retaliate. Had its infrastructure, military infrastructure had been severely damaged, we don't know that. The only thing we want is that, when it comes to International Atomic Energy Agency, the last governing body meeting of International Energy Agency, they have kind of asked many tough questions to Iran. So we're not talking Israel, we're not talking the United States, but when an organization like International Atomic Energy Agency raises questions, we have to listen to them. Countries like India, we have to listen to them. And though they have raised some very serious questions.
Narendra, I wanted to get a sort of a bigger picture sense from you. Obviously, you mentioned earlier that China could be a beneficiary here. As you articulate quite often, and again today, that the G7 is a sort of nearly redundant structure, and the world is changing, and we are in a change moment. And it's a transition era. We've seen the West collectively reference the West and struggle with war in Europe, have been unable to contain or have not been willing to contain the war, the attack on Gaza, and now the West, major supporting country in the region, is engaging in another war in Iran. I mean, the whole point there from the Asia, from the BRICS, from the global South, how will they be looking at that collection? Is it an accelerator when you put it all together to this change, the greater flow and turn to other centers of gravity in the world, like a China, like in India?
Well, the way we are looking at it is varying. I mean, we think that America in particular and the West part of the world, they don't understand Iran. They don't understand Islam. They don't understand the Arab world. But at the same time, they insist that they do. Even Chinese really, do they understand Islam? Do they understand the Arab world? Do they understand Iran at all? No, according to us, they don't. And that's part of the reason. When I say China will benefit, because China has invested heavily already in Iran, they want to invest $460 billion as part of their BRI initiative and so on and so forth. Now, the question is that when we in India, we think that we also don't want Iran to acquire nuclear weapons, but we want Iran to be mainstreamed. Iran to be, mainstream in terms of politics, in terms of global economic order, everything. For instance, we would love to buy oil from Iran, more oil from Iran. We would like to invest there, but we are not allowed because there are sanctions. They create problems for our companies and players and so on and so forth. Now, the question is that unless and until you mainstream Iran, you will not have the kind of political or geopolitical stability that the world needs. Now, but at the same time, the reality is Israel has its own way of looking at the world. Iran also has its own way of looking at particularly the Middle East and Central Asia and also the world. Iran is still live in the past. For them, it was a great civilization and a great power, but it's no longer a great power. There are many other countries in the world, they think they live in the past, for instance, China. Now, those are the challenges. Now, since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the 30 years the world enjoyed that stability because there was only one superpower, and that was the United States. But that's, for instance, fading. And we have not yet really, the world is not there in terms of the multipolar world. So I think what we have witnessed the last 18 hours, what we are witnessing in Gaza, what we are witnessing in other parts of the world, this is only the beginning. My own sense is the next 15, 20 years, we're going to see more of that. And one region which is going to see more such troubles and is going to take much longer time before actually fire starts, going down, coming down, that's the Middle East. And worry for countries like India is because we are still an oil economy. We are still heavily dependent on oil. And at the same time, we have millions working, in the Middle East. We are heavily integrated in terms of economy with the Middle Eastern country. So we have a lot to lose and we have a lot to gain if things work out in a positive direction. My own sense is that, what Israel is trying to do, if the aim is to topple the government there, go for a regime change, what they are forgetting is, since they also don't understand Islam, they will only end up strengthening the second line of leadership in Iran, which is actually, in terms of whether they, are they hardliners? They are probably super hardliners. So what Israel is going to get in the process, super hardliners in power in Tehran.